So my name is Ted Bartles. I am the fish culturist at the North Platte Fish Hatchery. So this is a typical pond at the North Platte Fish Hatchery. We have 44 ponds, 43 surface acres. This is an acre pond. We have, I think, what, 38 of these, I think. So every one of these ponds has their own freshwater inflow. That's what's spraying there. The cement structure you see there in the middle is called a chimney. So that's how we hold the water in the pond. It actually has a gate at the bottom of that. So we can open that gate and start drawing the water out of the pond into our catch basin. And we can also place a screen into that, so that'll hold the fish in the pond. So the day before, what we do, we actually drain those ponds down halfway. So that keeps the fish in the pond, so that we just got a little bit of water left with the fish, and then we're able to drain it into the kettle. So that just limits a lot of the stress on the fish having to fight the current. So they have a lot less current to fight in the pond than they would in the catch basin. So in the spring, what we're doing here is we're collecting our brood fish with a trap net. So you can see the lead coming off the front of the boat there. So what we do is we actually place that lead all the way up to the shoreline. And when the fish run into that, they follow that lead back into the trap. So that's how we collect fish. And it's also a way for management to sample the bodies of water to see what kind of fish populations we have in them. So you can see the fish there in the trap. So there's actually a way to open them in the back end there, and we actually dump the fish out into a tub. This is a gill net, so it's another way that we can sample our bodies of water and also collect brood fish. The way that you can see, they actually swim into that net and get caught by the gills, which is why they call it a gill net. And that actually sits at the bottom of the water table, so we can catch the bottom fish. And that's a female sauger that we collect here to create more sauger. So we dump, like I said, we dump that trap net out into a trough. So those are our fish that we collect. We're looking for northern pike there, so we'll actually go through and sex those fish. We'll look for males and females, and we'll actually discard any fish that's not a northern pike back into the water. And these are our shocking boats, another way to sample the bodies of water and also collect brood. So they use an electrical impulse that will actually stun the fish and bring them towards the boat, and we actually dip the fish off as they come to the surface. This is one of the female walleye that we've collected at the lake to expel the eggs out of. So that's what we're doing there, is stripping the eggs out of the female. Those eggs are very small. There's 120 to 140,000 of those in a quart. So a fish like that can have up to 3 quarts. So almost 500,000 eggs will be in each one of these fish. So you see that the fish has been dried off. What we're trying to do is maintain dryness throughout this whole process, so we're not getting any water into any of these eggs. So what we'll do is we'll fertilize these eggs, and then we'll add water, because everything is activated by water. The egg will swell up and allow the sperm to come in and fertilize the egg after we use the water to activate them. You'll see that here in a second when we're done getting the eggs out with the fertilization process. Every single kid thinks that looks like applesauce. You're like the 4th people to say that. That I've heard it doesn't taste good, so I don't think you want to try that. So here we're fertilizing them now with the males. So we're keeping everything in suspension. So we're getting all the eggs up in the water column. So we actually added the water already. So that keeps all of the eggs in contact with the sperm, so we can get fertilization of all those eggs. We use a turkey feather to stir it up, so it's nice and delicate, so we're not breaking any of those eggs. So after this process, it takes about 45 seconds. That's all the longer that the sperm are motile, and we'll add a clay substance to them called what do we call it? It's a clay. So it's a really fine clay that actually adheres to the egg. So in the wild, what those fish are trying to do is they're trying to spawn on a rocky substrate. So they'll stick to that, and that keeps them out of the muck, so they can constantly get fresh water and oxygen. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to coat those eggs so they no longer stick. So then they don't stick to each other. And you'll see why here in a minute where I get them into the hatching jars. So these are some male sauger. So what we're going to do is we're going to extract the milt out of these. We're going to use an aspirator. You'll see that in a video here. So we're going to collect the milt out of these fish, and we're going to add something called an extender. It's a saline solution, so it's got salt in it, and that preserves the milt so we can store it in our fridge for 7 to 10 days, and we can use that to fertilize eggs as we take them out of the female. We can also ship that milt to different states so that they also have some ability to produce some sauger of their own, and also a hybrid called sagi. So we actually anesthetize these fish before we do this. We put them to sleep, so they're a lot easier to handle. And you see we got towels there, keeping everything nice and dry because we don't want any water to come in contact with any of the milt to activate it. Because once it's activated, there's no way to turn it off, and then they're no longer viable to to fertilize our eggs.
You put them to sleep by
This is a hybrid bluegill. It's a cross between a bluegill and a green sunfish. So the process of fertilization for these is very similar, just on a smaller scale. So we actually have the milt there in the Petri dish that we're adding the water to. So we're activating that right now, and we'll dump that into the eggs there in that larger dish. Yellow is the eggs, and the same process. We'll stir it up, everything will be fertilized, and then we'll muck them also to make sure that we're not getting that adhesive coating. And these are some newly hatched fry. So they're sitting on the bottom, just waiting to fully develop before they swim up. So, and this is, we're going to create some hybrid crappie here. So this is a cross between a black crappie and a white crappie. And we're actually going to triploid them, which we'll talk about it here after this fertilization process. So what we'll do here is we're actually removing the male testes. They don't have a lot of milt in them, so we actually have to remove them, and we'll actually masticate them. So that means chop them up, and we'll actually spray them with our extender to get a larger volume of the milt. And here we're injecting the female with a hormone. So we're actually collecting these fish before they're actively spawning. So what we're doing with that hormone is we're actually causing the ovaries to ripen. So the eggs are going to be viable by the time we want to. So we'll be able to inject them, and there's a 24-hour latency period on that. So that means in 24 hours, we should have viable eggs coming out of this fish. So it gives us the ability to stage when we're actually going to be able to produce fertilized eggs. So this is the mastication of the testes. So let's keep that all in a Petri dish, keep it dry, make sure that we're keeping the sperm viable before we actually want to create the fertilization process. And this is the triploid process that I was telling you about. So what we're actually going to do with these eggs is once they're fertilized, we're going to triploid them, which actually makes them sterile. We're going to put them in that metal cylinder there is full of eggs, and then it's filled up with water. And once we get that full, we're going to tighten it down, and then we're going to increase the pressure in that chamber up to 6,000 pounds per inch. So in a certain period of time post-fertilization, what they're going to do is they're going to expel a chromosome out of the egg. So when we put that extra pressure on there, it's not allowing that chromosome to escape. So that creates the triploid fish, which then makes them sterile. So we do that for a species like that because we don't want that out in the wild reproducing. So this way we can eliminate that process, and we can also control the population. So if we want a smaller population, we'll do that. These are the triploid crappie after they drain out of our ponds, 30 days or so. So that's us harvesting them out of our catch basin. We'll go over that a little bit more when we talk about the catfish. You can understand how that works. And white bass is another species that we do here. So it's very similar to what we do with the gray crappie. Another interesting part with these, though, is these eggs are only viable for a couple hours, which means they're only capable of accepting a sperm for a certain period of time. So you can see the really nice yellow eggs in there. Those are good eggs. And those ones that are really cloudy, those aren't any good anymore. So they were already passed or not fully developed yet. So we have to be checking these fish every couple hours to see if they've got viable eggs. And as soon as they're viable, we need to take them and fertilize them. Otherwise, we won't get any white bass produced. And this is collecting the male sperm. that we'll use to fertilize them. We don't really use this process anymore. We'll actually use the aspirator on these anymore, or just actually put them right on the eggs. And then we're going to inject these also with the hormone. Same thing, just that extra boost to make sure we get those eggs to fully ripen. And these are the fertilized eggs on the hatching battery. We'll talk about that process in a little bit here. We got some fry coming up. So this is a larval stage of our fry. You can see they don't have a mouth or not really any fins yet or anything. They're actually just feeding off their yolk sac, still developing. So over the period of a couple of days, their mouth will form, they'll start growing fins, and then they'll actually be able to swim and feed on their own. The next picture will show you what a fully formed one will look like here. So you can see it's got nice big eyes, mouth out in front, some fins growing. Still got a yolk sac a little bit, but it'll actually start actively feeding. This is what we do with our walleye once we return from the lake. So there's about 30 quarts of eggs in that cooler, and we'll put 3 quarts in each one of those jars. That's what those lines are. So that top line is 3 quarts. That's the ideal amount we want to put in them. That way the jar doesn't overflow, but it also lets our eggs roll in the jar efficiently. So like I said before, we actually take off that adhesive coating on these eggs so that we can keep them separated. So we're trying to keep all those eggs rolling in suspension. Everybody's getting fresh water, oxygen, so they can stay alive and finish up their development process. Once we got these jars filled up, we put on what we call a hatching battery. So that's that aluminum stand there. And each one of those hoses will run a gallon of water through these at all times, keeping everybody in suspension. So you can see how nice and yellow these eggs are. So that's the first day, they stay really nice and yellow. And then we'll have a picture. You can see them on the right there a little bit. We'll pan over there a little bit. You see they're turning a lot darker green. We call that stage eye up. So what's happening there is they're getting the eye pigments are developing, so they're changing colors. That's how we can tell how far along the process of development they are. So another way that we gauge that is we actually have something called a temperature unit. A temperature unit is 1 degree, about 32 degrees. And we hatch at a constant 57 degrees. We get 25 temperature units per day. So we know in about 300 temperature units, these fish are going to start hatching, which is 12 to 14 days. When we hatch these eggs, you can see that aluminum trough behind there where the water's flowing in. These will actually swim up out of the jars. So we'll actually collect these fish into there's some gray tanks we'll see here in a second. And we'll put about 1 million to 1.5 million of these fry in each one of these tanks. So that's why we have different, you see behind there's a little more yellow egg, and then on the right, you'll see in a second, is some newer eggs that are very yellow, so they're probably only a day or two old. Those are the gray tanks that they hatch into. So we have different lots of fish, so different age classes of our eggs, so that we can hatch as many eggs as possible. We can't hatch them all at once. We'll have 6 or 7 million hatched in a day, and we only have so much room in our tanks to hatch them, so we'll be able to get one batch out while the next batch is hatching. Just way more efficient method of doing it. You can see here, the eggs are flowing around in the jars. Those white eggs are not viable, so they're either died or they're never fertilized. What's going to happen is over time, we'll keep treating these eggs, and that rolling action will actually bring those eggs up to the top. So when that happens, we'll be able to actually siphon those eggs off, because we don't want a lot of those dead eggs in our jars. What will happen is you'll start growing a lot of fungus. And that fungus will bind up the entire jar, and then all those eggs will die. So we're trying to make sure we're keeping those eggs as clean as possible. So by the time we get these cleaned up, we'll have almost 99% of these eggs will be good eggs. And that's a good way so we can gauge the number of fry we're going to get out of each one of these jars. That way we can enumerate how many are going into our tanks, because we want to have a pretty solid number of fish we have in those tanks for when we're stocking, and also for when we're going to dip them out into our ponds. We want to make sure we have enough going to the different bodies of water. So here you can see them siphoning off all those dead eggs. So you can see a line kind of going across the top there, the white eggs. That's what we're looking to do. So we can get those eggs to separate out, from the good eggs on the bottom to the bad eggs on the top.
Your bad eggs. How many good eggs get caught in the bad eggs?
So we do get some, and what we'll do is when we get down to this point, usually we'll actually siphon up that next layer, and we'll actually put them in a different jar, call that a nurse jar. And that jar, over time, will start separating out also. We'll take off the top layer of that. So then we're trying to keep as many of those good eggs as possible. So there's some pictures, some egg development. You can see them on the computer. We'll have another one come up here in a second so you can see the eggs developing. So here, this one, you can just see that germinal disc starting to form. That's a little tiny bulge on the yolk there. So these are only a day or two old. And these are not quite to the eye-up stage. You can see they have the eye spots, but they don't have the pigmentation. But these are probably still 10-day, 12-day old fry. They're getting pretty close to when they're hatching. And here is the hatch. You can see that in nature, that same thing. They're all trying to hatch at once. I'm sure it's a predatory thing. So you have a mass hatch, you can only eat so many. So like I said, that 12 to 14 days is when we're going to have pretty much the entire lot's going to hatch all in a day and a day and a half period. You can see them here. They're in our gray tank now. So there's a million and a half fry in each one of these tanks. You can see they're shining a light in there that's drawing all of them fry in. So they're photopositive. That means they're attracted to that light. And over time, as they develop, they're actually going to come up to the surface and have a gulp of air. And that's how they fill up their swim bladder. So that's how they stay buoyant in the water to maintain their ability to swim so they don't sink. And after 25 to 30 days, this is what a walleye looks like when it's coming out of our ponds. They're anywhere from 1 inch to 2 inches long. A lot of these will end up getting stocked in Nebraska waters then. Some will get stocked back into our ponds to grow a little bit longer. We'll grow them all up to even 10 inches in the fall for some of our advanced stockings. And you see here we have earth and bottom ponds, so there's a little mucky, but that's the process of draining. And here we're staining our pond. It's just a way for us to be able to get a look at some of our fish, especially if we're feeding them minnows or something. So we're not actually feeding them like a pellet that they'd come up and eat. Otherwise, we don't get to see these fish. This way we can monitor their growth, make sure there's some fish in the pond and they're growing appropriately. We're also looking for some minnows, make sure, they got enough food in there to eat. Okay, this will get into the draining process a little bit here. This is our catfish draining. I'll show you. This is in the catch basins. This is what drains, the pond drains into this. Every pond has its own catch basin. So what we have is it's a rectangle that's full of water. So in front of the guy there, Brian, is a crowd screen. So right in front of him, we can actually use that and push the fish into a denser area. So they're really compact in there so that we can scoop them out. Behind that is the screen that holds the fish in the kettle. And then behind that's another slot that has our dam boards. So our dam boards hold our water level. So as we crawl them up into a smaller area, we can dip those fish out and pull a dam board to keep on condensing them down, down, down until we can get every fish out. So we can get a total harvest out of our ponds and our catch baits. We have about 9,000 catfish in each one of our ponds. So about 3,000 pounds because they're about 3 to the pound. And what we're doing here is we're putting them into our fish truck. On top of this bucket, you'll see there's a scale. So with each basket, we're going to get a total weight. So we'll get a total weight out of the pond. And before this happens, we usually go through and we'll actually get a known weight of a certain number of fish, and we'll count those fish. So that weight will give us a total number of fish per pound. So we can take that number, multiply by the total pounds that we're taking out of the pond, and then we get total number of fish that we get out of our pond. This eliminates our need to count every single fish that we're getting out of the pond. That way we can stock a known number in each different body of water or back into our ponds. Also eliminates a lot of our physical labor having this fish hoist for us. So that's kind of nice. There's some walleye that I was talking about. Those are coming out in the fall, that 8 to 10 inches that we're going to stock. And a striper, that's a different species that we raise. So this is Brian doing the sample counts then. So we're taking our numbers and adding them all up to make sure we have the right number of fish out of our pond. This is what we call a grater box. So what we're doing here is we're taking off any of our minnows that we fed these. This way we can get a better number. So if we have a bunch of minnows in with our fish, it throws our numbers of fish off. So we're trying to get those as clean as possible. Another thing we can do with this is actually grate off a smaller fish. So when we have the big fish mixed in with our smaller fish, we actually take the smaller fish off and grow them at a faster rate because they're not competing with those more aggressive, larger fish anymore. After we're done draining, a lot of times we'll bring our fish over here to the raceway. And what this is part of our HACCP plan. It's a hazard analysis critical control point. So this is one of our control points. What we're going to do here is we're going to go through all these fish and run them across a sorter table, and we're going to look for any rough fish. So our water source is a reservoir, which already has a lot of the rough fish in it, like carp and drum and carp suckers, sorry. So what we're going to do is we're going to try to eliminate any of those fish from being stocked in different bodies of water, because that's something very important, is to eliminate a lot of our AIS, aquatic and nuisance species, out of our lakes and rivers. So we're making sure that after sometimes they rehabilitate a lake and we'll be stocking these fish in there, we want to make sure we're not reintroducing any of those fish that they tried to eliminate before. So that's what we're doing on the sorter table, is picking off a lot of those rough fish like our carp. This is a paddlefish. We've raised these in the past. Depending on the year, we'll raise between 10 to 15 different species in a production cycle. So this is one of them that we've done in the past. And this is how we stock our fish. You can see that the fish truck is up there. All we do is attach a pipe to our cam locks and dump the fish right back into the body of water that they're supposed to go to. These are rainbow trout getting stocked around the North Platte area. We don't raise any of them, but just a video to show you kind of the process of most of the time we do. If we can't get close enough to the body of water, you've got to basket them off, but most of the time we can just dump them like this. A lot less stressful for the fish. And that's the end goal, to create a fishery for people to come out and catch the fish. This is one of our newer programs we have at the hatchery. This is the freshwater mussel program. So the freshwater mussel is one of the most imperiled fauna in North America. So that's why we're working with these. A lot of the different mussel species that are in Nebraska are actually threatened or already extirpated from the state. So we're doing an augmentation and reintroduction program. So the plain pocketbook is the first one we started working with. It was only found in one water body in Nebraska. So we do have a brood source at least. This is what they look like when they're displaying. So that means that female is gravid. So she has babies in her gills there. And I'll talk about that process a little bit more here in a second. So what we're doing here is we're actually injecting water into those gills. So the glaucidia, which is the larval stage of the mussel, is actually in the gills. They call it marsupial gill, like a kangaroo. That's where they hold their babies. So what we're doing is we're actually just extracting those glaucidia out of there and putting them in that beaker so we can collect them and enumerate them so that we can inoculate our fish. So this is the inoculation process. That means we're infecting them with this parasitic stage of the mussel. All we're doing, you can see them in the pipette there, just little tiny white dots. They're about 1/4 of a millimeter. What they're going to do is they're going to clamp down on the fish's gills and become encapsulated in the fish's gill. That way they can complete their, as their parasite, they'll actually use the fish to complete their life cycle to become a fully formed juvenile. So as the fish swims around, that juvenile mussel is going to develop and then drop off back into the water column and settle in some sediment. And that way that they can be distributed throughout their watershed without having to actually move on their own. There'll be a picture here in a minute. You can see the glaucidia actually attached to the gill up close. So this is not necessarily harmful to the fish. It's probably not their favorite thing, but it doesn't kill them. So you can see all them little white dots are all the Glaucidia. On a fish this size, we'll put anywhere from 3,000 to 5,000 probably on a fish. And we'll actually put these fish out in these cages into our ponds. So as that mussel develops, it'll just naturally fall off into our pond and grow there all summer long. We'll be able to go out there and collect them in the fall. This is our intensive culture system, which means we have more control over it. So we'll actually put the little mussels in each one of those beakers, and we'll have fresh water and fresh food flowing in there all the time. That way we can monitor their growth and actually have a little more control on what's actually happening with these mussels. And this is what they'll look like after a couple months. They're 2 to 3 millimeters here. What we're trying to do is produce a mussel that's about 15 millimeters, which we believe is about how big they'd get in the wild in 1 year. So that's what we're trying to mimic. So that's when we stock them, is we'll actually grow them for 2 years. So what we're doing here is we're looking at a female plain pocketbook, and she is displaying her lure. So that's just a piece of her mantle that she's actually grown to look like a fish. So what she's trying to do is mimic a little minnow that's going to entice a larger fish to come and bite it. So when a fish bites it, it actually grabs onto the gills that are holding the juvenile mussels. And when that happens, it'll actually burst those gills, and the Glaucidia will flow out into the fish's mouth. And as it breathes, it'll suck all of them Glaucidia back onto the gills. And that's when the fish can clamp down. So that's the process we were mimicking there by putting the pipette and actually just layering those Glaucidia onto its gills. So in a natural setting, that's how that would take place. So it's a pretty neat process for something that doesn't really have any idea what a minnow looks like. Create something on its own body that can mimic a minnow. This is just one technique that mussels use. There's several different techniques. They can actually expel a packet called a glutinate that will actually look like a larval insect. So the fish will come and bite that. And they can also even entice fish to actually swim into their shell, and they'll actually clamp down on it, and that'll expel Glaucidia onto the gills. So that's one of the reasons that these animals are so imperiled, is the fish host species are actually becoming rarer in their bodies of water through dams, pollution, siltation. So a lot of habitat degradation is happening with these, and it's almost all done by humans. So that's why we're putting a lot of effort and emphasis on these, trying to get these populations back to where they need to be. So you can see the gills there in the middle. Those are all full of little tiny mussels. Our sample counts are showing there's over 1 million of those little babies in each one of these females. These are what they look like in the fall. So these are ones that we'll actually grow these for 1 more year, and then we'll start marking them. So we'll actually put a little glue dot on each one of these like this here. This way we can know that every one of these mussels that have a glue dot on it came from the hatchery. So we know these are hatchery produced mussels. So if we find one out in the wild that doesn't have this glue dot on it, we know we have natural recruitment. And that's what our end goal is, to create a naturally reproducing population of these mussels. That's our final goal for success. So we'll actually put something, what's that?
When did you start this program?
I think it was 2014.
Okay.
So another tag we'll put on these is called a pit tag. So this is a passive integrated transponder. So what it'll do is we'll actually use this wand here you can see, and that sends an electric signal out. And when it hits that pit tag, it sends a signal back into that reader telling us that there's a mussel there. So that's the way we can go and actually monitor our mussel population, the stream we're putting them in, because they do live in the sediment. So that's the way we can find them. So we'll be able to use that wand and be able to dig them up and find out some growth information. We can sex them, see if we have gravid females, so we can see if there's a possibility that we'll get some natural recruitment. So that's just one of our monitoring tools. We actually can individually identify each mussel through that pit tag, so we can really gather a lot of information on each individual. So that's the pit tag there, that larger white dot actually is covered in a dental cement that just protects the actual pit tag. This is a time lapse of them digging back down into the sediment. So they actually do live in the sediment. Just a very small portion of the mussel is actually in the water column, just enough for them to be able to put their siphons up, filter the water, and that's how they breathe and feed. And that is the end of the video. So if you guys have any questions, we can start answering them.
Any questions about fish hatchery? What kind of fish they grow?
So how long does it take for a normal egg to hatch?
So every species is different. A walleye, that's 12 to 14 days. It goes all the way down to like white bass is only a couple days. Something like a cold water trout, they will take up to 30 days, and they will take another 25 days before they even swim up. So that every different a lot of it is based on water temperature. So that's that temperature units that we were talking about earlier.
Do you hatch out one species more than the rest, or is it pretty equal across the board?
We definitely raise more walleye than other species. On an average year, it's probably about 20 to 22 million walleye fry will hatch at our facility. And then it goes all the way down. So some of the stuff we actually do out in the ponds. So we'll actually just stock brood fish into our ponds. So we're just looking for, we'll put X number of brood out there, expecting Y number of return out of those brood fish. They'll produce a certain number of fry for us, or fingerling fish actually. So it definitely varies. But yeah, walleye are definitely the predominant species that we raise.
I have a question. Do you enjoy fishing? Like, do you go fishing yourself?
Yes, it's definitely something that I like to do more of. Got a younger family, so it makes it a little more difficult to do a lot of it, but we always try getting up a couple times, especially when doing some of the trout stocking and stuff, something that's quick and fast to make sure everybody's attention is in there.
In your opinion, what is the best local fish to catch and eat?
Are you talking catchability or flavor?
Flavor, yeah. What do you think tastes the best? Yeah, no, not the easiest.
I think sausage are my favorites, so like the northern pike and muskie, I think, are the best eating fish.
All right, any other questions? All right, what do you tell our presenter?
Thank you.
Thanks for paying attention. You guys have a good Friday.
All right, thank you so much. We appreciate it.
You're welcome. Bye.